I was a TradFi diehard. One of my friends, he was like an early Bitcoin investor, and he's done quite well with it. But he was always chilling me that Bitcoin, quite skeptical. You know, worst thing that can happen is I have a trip to Hong Kong and then afterwards I go back to my normal job. So there's a big deadline coming up, as you mentioned, the 1st of July. So that is when formally and officially the MiCA transition period ends. The nuclear bomb would and could be to block the app from the App Store, to block the URLs so that users cannot access those unregulated exchanges anymore. The number one Polish exchange called Zonda Crypto, where also suddenly one day to the next, it went black. They couldn't withdraw any funds anymore. The owner disappeared, still at large, nowhere to be found. So the thing that those two exchanges had in common was they didn't have a license.
Welcome to On-Chain Capital, your front row seat to the future of finance. From Web3 and AI innovation to digital asset policy and the power shift between East and West. Today, we're going to unpack it all with Erald Ghoos, CEO of OKX Europe. Errol, really good to have you on the show.
Thank you for having me on, Sean. It's an honor.
Errol, so you've been the CEO of OKX Europe for over 3 years now, and I believe you're based in Malta. So for anyone who may not know you and some of the work that you have done in the Euro time zone, can you share a little bit about how you got to where you are and the journey that took you to your position today?
Absolutely. Happy to walk you through it. So indeed, I'm now heading up the European entity for OKX since a little bit over 3 years. In those last 3 years, we have been very much focused on building the right foundation. And that foundation consists of making sure that we have our company incorporated in the right jurisdiction in Europe. Europe, you're right, the EEA, it consists of 30 different member states. Each of them, they have their own pros and cons when it comes to incorporation tax, in terms of employment laws, in terms of employment costs. Some countries are a little bit more cheaper than others. So it's quite particularly difficult to find the right jurisdiction in where you want to set up your entity and your headquarter in Europe. We've been taking our time for this. We've been evaluating many of the different countries in Europe. So this is where we are then. We also spent quite a lot of time on finding and getting the right licenses, right? In order to operate a financial institution like us in Europe, we need to make sure that we're really licensed up. So it also took us quite some time to get those right financial licenses. OKX globally, we already exist for 13, 14 years, right? We originate from Asia, but in order to localize our global OKX product to fit the European regulatory standards, the security standards, the data privacy standards, and also to make it feel and experience like a fully localized product, it also took us quite some time. So the first 3 years, we've been very much focused on building those foundational baselines in which we're now very confident. And now we are ready for a very aggressive growth in Europe. Prior to OKX, I was for several years also in Binance. I started in Binance as a regional head for the Benelux. And then eventually I also evolved into a more pan-European leadership role. Before Binance, I was since 2017 in Crypto.com, where I started off as the chief operating officer. And then at some moment in time, I also assumed the chief compliance position. It was a great experience, learned everything that I need to know about crypto and blockchain during those years. Prior to 2017, which was my first entry and practical work experience with crypto, I was more in traditional finance. I did a few bank startups in different European countries. Originally, I'm from Belgium. I have a background in computer science, but I moved out of Belgium in my early 20s, and I've been living a little bit all over the place ever since. And now since the last 3 years, in the beautiful sunny island of Malta, where we from OKX have our European headquarters.
Amazing. Okay, so there's a lot to unpack there. So let's go one by one. Actually, I mean, while you were sharing your journey up until this point, I already noticed there's a lot of commonalities between you and I, right? I remember reading from your bio, you also have a computer science, computer engineering background, as do I. So I think both of us probably appreciate a lot of what the underlying technology now brings to the financial product that is known as crypto, stable coins, and blockchains and everything else. But also, like many of us in Web3, we both also come from traditional finance and then kind of cross the line into Web3. So maybe take me back to 2017. I think that's the time when you started at crypto.com as the COO. Well, first of all, were you in Hong Kong at the time when you joined crypto.com? And then also, what was that experience like? I mean, what made you go from what you were doing before into this vast unknown crypto semi question mark industry at that time, right? Help me understand what was your experience and what were you going through in your mind?
So back to 2017, early 2017, I was a little bit in a traditional finance job, a little bit dead end. At that moment in time, I was living and working in between Bulgaria and Berlin in Germany. So I had two entities in those countries. And then at some moment in time, I was contacted by Chris, the founder and CEO of Crypto.com, saying that they were looking for a COO to join the company. I heard about crypto, I heard about Bitcoin, but I was very skeptical about it, because I was a TradFi diehard. One of my friends, he was like an early Bitcoin investor, and he's done quite well with it, but he was always chilling me that Bitcoin, quite skeptical. And then Chris, he contacted me. He flew me over to Hong Kong. I thought like, well, worst thing that can happen is I have a trip to Hong Kong, and then afterwards I go back to my normal job. But Chris actually did a fantastic job in explaining me the vision of the company, of Crypto.com. Back then it was still called Monaco. And then before the weekend was over, I made up my mind that I want to be part of that company and of that industry. And then next week, I packed my bags and I moved over to Hong Kong. And yeah, the rest is the history that I told you in the previous part.
Amazing. So you actually lived in Hong Kong, so you know how what the environment has gone through. I mean, the interesting thing is Hong Kong was very early in the whole crypto cycle over the last 15 years or so. And then Hong Kong also went through a period in which it was completely closed door, shut everything out, in which case I think Crypto.com, amongst many other firms, moved to Singapore or UAE and other places. So Hong Kong has gone through many cycles. But let's focus back on your journey, right? So you went from Crypto.com, and then you spent 3 years in Binance. So what made you move to Binance? And I mean, if I look at the timing, that must have been the time when Binance was under a lot of regulatory scrutiny. That was the time, wasn't it? The time when you spent during those periods.
It was indeed right after I joined that there was more and more scrutiny coming on the industry as a whole, when the first regulations around the whole world started to appear. So it was a general trend in the whole crypto industry that regulations started to pop up left, right, and center on all the industries. So when I moved from Crypto.com to Binance, it was right around the time when COVID started to pop up. I was in Hong Kong. You see these things evolve right across the border. I was like, what is going to happen? And then I also, thought it was better and wiser to sit it out in Europe. I then moved back to Europe. That was also coinciding with the time that I moved to Binance. Binance at that moment in time was, on top of the hockey stick growth. Binance already was legendary at that time. So I joined Binance in that regard. Indeed, then there was more regulatory scrutiny. on the company coming, and not only on Binance, but as the industry as a whole. We saw that in Europe, some countries, they started to come up with crypto registration frameworks. Some of them came up with crypto licensing already at that time. So there was a clear trend that crypto future would be the regulated future. We saw more happening also in the US around it, in Dubai, in Australia, Singapore and Hong Kong started to also shape and form some crypto regulatory frameworks. So the whole global race on how to regulate crypto became hotter and hotter at that time. Then at some moment in time, I quit the crypto industry. I kind of like was retired or pre-retired, and I was spending time in Asia. I traveled quite some time for almost a year through Asia, where I also met my wife in Vietnam. And at some moment in time, one of my former colleagues of Binance reached out to me saying that he is now in OKX and that they're looking for a head of Europe for OKX. I was like, no, I'm done with it. I'm kind of like retired. But then he told me like, look, the team is fantastic. It's a great leadership. The vision of the company is wonderful. You should have a chat with them. So I did have a chat with the company, with the leadership. I spoke with Star. I spoke with Hong, with the rest of the people who were leading the global markets program, and immediately was sold to the vision of Star, to the focus on the regulatory clarity and not having any shortcuts on compliance. So that also really like instilled my passion for OKX. It was like very clear, no shortcuts on compliance, no shortcuts on the regulation and regulatory engagement. So then I signed up with OKX. I packed my bags. I moved to Malta, and this is where we are now. So it's been an immense and great and very satisfactory journey since I joined.
I mean, it's almost 10 years of your career now being spent with three of the largest exchanges in the world. So you must have seen a lot of things both from the inside and also from the outside, right? And one thing I wanted to ask you was, at what point did you realize, and you touch upon this a little bit, at what point did you realize getting a license is not only inevitable, it is a must, but then also how did companies like Binance and OKX and Crypto.com decide where to get the license? I mean, you mentioned the European headquarters for OKX is in Malta. What makes that decision, right? Versus UK or France or some of the larger jurisdictions. How did you come with those kind of decision points?
Mm-hmm. So, as I mentioned during my introduction, before I was in the whole crypto industry, I was doing bank startups. A bank startup sounds very complicated, but it's basically, like in high level, pretty much the same as a crypto company, right? You get the license, you get the infrastructure, you get a team, you have a product, you launch it, you grow it, you manage the team. So the licensing part is also quite fundamental. During those times, I had some experience with 6 countries for a bank license. I also had a few EMI, electronic money institution licenses that I obtained in Europe. So I already had like quite a bit of a background and experience in which regulators are proactive, which regulators are accessible, which regulators are receptive to new technologies. So I already had like quite a bit of a good sense of which regulators in each of the different European countries have, which are their strengths and their weaknesses. So then when I joined the crypto space, we already went back in the days with Crypto.com for the licensed approach, right? Chris was already like very clear and sold on the vision that the future of crypto was going to be the regulated one. We needed to get bank accounts. It's difficult to get as a high risk industry business to get bank accounts in order to process money in and out. Now, when you have a registration or you have a license, it helps, of course, with opening doors to the traditional finance players, such as banks or payment service providers. So that immediately helped. We then also explored Malta, that was already at that time positioning itself as a good regulatory hub in Europe to get the crypto registration. That was before there was like any talks around MiCA. That was still too early. I think the concept of MiCA came up 2018, 2019 or something like that. With Crypto.com, we were already exploring that back in 2017. So we chose Malta for its proactive thinking, being one of the first regulators across the world to come up with the crypto regulatory framework, also for the access, the ease of access to the regulator. So that was the choice that we were making back then. Then when I joined OKX, of course, I could then use the experience that I had from Crypto.com. And then we also decided to set up the license and the headquarters in Malta.
You know, it's quite interesting. A few episodes ago, I had a chance to interview Richard Tang, the co-CEO of Binance. And obviously, as you know, before he joined Binance, he was the CEO of ADGM, right, which is within the UAE. So naturally, one thing led to another, and now Binance is licensed out of the UAE within the ADGM regime. So it looks like there's a bit of a once you have familiarity and you have a better understanding of the regime and you potentially help develop some part of it, then there is a lot more willingness on both sides to really make it work. And before we talk about MiCA, you touch on MiCA. I do want to double click really, a lot more on that. But before we do that, I want to go back to Malta. I've heard many people ask me, in Europe, there are multiple of these smaller jurisdictions, more island jurisdictions like Malta, Gibraltar. I've heard the island of Man and a few others. Have you kind of looked into these and how do you actually evaluate, like for someone that's looking to get a license now, right? For the audience that's thinking about that. Obviously, you've gone through the process with Malta, but there are also other jurisdictions. So what are some of those decision points to really think about?
Mm-hmm. So one thing that is very important for the audience to understand is the concept of passporting. What is passporting? Right. Passporting is a concept in Europe or in the European Union, or even more specifically in the EEA. Let me explain what the difference is. Europe is a continent, right?
Yes.
The EU is the European Union, in which there is like a freedom of travel of people and goods and services. But then there is also another concept, which is the EEA, the European Economical Area. The European Economical Area, as it says, like it shares a European Economical Union. Licenses can be passported to all the 30 EEA member states. So all the 30 member states that signed or that are part of this EEA concept, they share the same concept of licensing. Like you can have a license in one country, in one national country from one national regulator, but then you can invoke the concept of passporting and move that license that it's applicable to all those 30 countries. It's a fantastic concept. It takes away a lot of burden because before the concept of MiCA existed, an operator like us, we would have to seek approval, regulatory approval in each of the 30 EEA member states, right? It's regulatory and legal wise a very complex, expensive and long process to get to that. And what happens with this? It's usually players like ours. We would only go for the top 5 of the economies in Europe, right? Germany, right. Netherlands, France, Italy. People would not bother to get like a license or a registration in some of the smaller countries like Belgium or Slovenia or Bulgaria, right? Because it would be too complex and too cumbersome to get this. So that concept of passporting, it's wonderful. Now, in order to get to that passport, you need to get a license first, right? You need to find the right jurisdiction. What is the right jurisdiction? It's a jurisdiction that is proactive and that already has a regulatory framework around this. Usually there are some countries in Europe that are more advanced. Who are the countries that are more advanced into this? The ones that heavily rely in their GDP or in their economy on providing financial services. There are some countries in Europe that are highly dependent on agriculture, on automotive, on engineering, on other things. But it's usually some of the countries that you mentioned that really want to attract the right businesses by having a strong licensing framework, which are typically those countries: Ireland, Luxembourg, Netherlands, Malta, Cyprus. Those are countries where the economy really strongly depends on the financial services, right? Other countries are also quite advanced in this, but they're less dependent on those services that they provide. Germany, one of the biggest, automotive and manufacturing hubs. For them, this is a great product and service as well, but their economy heavily relies on the automotive. Other countries, right, like Italy, there the economy depends heavily on tourism, on food production, on other things, on car manufacturing, right? So there are typical some hubs and some spots in Europe that naturally, because of the size of the country, because of the lack of other industries, that really have to specialize themselves in financial services. So this is where we see that usually there is a little bit more attraction to these types of services, right? For instance, Malta, it's a small island in the Mediterranean. They have been very strongly positioning themselves on providing gambling and gaming licenses, fund management, payment and electronic money institution licenses. And then when this whole crypto scene, started to develop, they were also one of the first regulators around the world to say, like, hey, let's also focus on crypto to come up with like a fully regulated environment around this. So those things also really help with global adoption, global recognition of the industry.
Wow, fascinating. I mean, for those of us that are not in the Eurozone, very, very often we kind of see it, we read the headlines, but it's very difficult to dive into the details to figure out what each jurisdiction actually means and what they carry. So really thank you for sharing for that. So let's talk about MiCA then, right? OKX, I believe early last year was the first global exchange to have a MiCA license. I mean, what did it take to get there? But more importantly, what were some of the operational preparedness that you and your team needed to do to get to that point?
So MiCA came into effect. It was announced already quite some I think 2 years. It was announced. So industry participants, our peers, our competitors, we were informed. We knew already that MiCA was going to go into effect 1st of January 2025. Now, what does it take, right? It's an entire overhaul of the already existing framework. As I mentioned earlier, it's not too far away from the complexity of getting a full-blown banking license, right? Of course, a bank license, there are complete different setups when it comes to capital reserves and compliance with Basel II and Basel III. Those are the things that don't apply on crypto or participating in interbanking money markets. Those are things that don't apply to crypto. So in that sense, it's much more complex. But as a fully regulated financial institution like OKX has, we have 3 financial licenses, 2 next to our MiCA. So we have to have like a full board. We have to comply with full governance. We have to make sure that our setup is fully GDPR compliant. What is GDPR? It's the European General Data Protection Act. We need to make sure that our data centers are within the European Union, that the services that we provide to our users are also held within, the European Union or in equivalent jurisdictions that also comply with data secrecy and protection acts. We need to make sure that we comply with also the highest security standards on our hot and our cold wallet. We need to make sure that we have full data reporting and that we have AML transaction controls in place. on the whole team, the whole leadership team in the company in Europe, we need to go through a fit and proper assessment.
Right.
We need to provide on me, like, have I been part of any company in the past that was doing any wrongdoing? I have to provide all my police reports. I have to sign many declarations. I have to declare where I live in case that I ever decide to do a hit and run. I will never leave the airport here in Malta because like they can stop me at any moment in time. So it just adds that specific level of transparency, security. You need to make sure that you have the right vetting on your team. It's a very strenuous and complex process to get to that MiCA license. The good thing is we were in Malta already before MiCA. We were registered there already with OKX with OKCoin before, so we already had like a long-standing relationship with the local regulator. So for us personally, the uplift to the MiCA license from where we were already licensed was relatively doable compared to if you would start from a complete scratch blank field or a green field application. Then the uplift would of course be very heavy. But since we were already there since 2021, it was a reasonable, manageable uplift.
So what I take from that is you guys have the foresight to not only pick the right jurisdictions and already operating there, but obviously you've been preparing up to the point when MiCA becomes activated, and that you would be one of the first to actually get it. So then back to your earlier points, to then be able to passport it and essentially have the capability to operate within the Eurozone. So that's really amazing. But I'm thinking about what I read recently. I think there's a July 1st deadline that's coming up, right? So all of the exchanges that are operating need to fall under the MiCA regime. If you're not, you're going to get shut down. So I'm assuming that's going to really impact not only a lot of kind of exchange operators, but more importantly, a lot of users that are still having their assets locked in these exchanges. I mean, how is that going to go play out? This is we're talking about probably tens of millions of users, if not more, right?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So there's a big deadline coming up, as you mentioned, the 1st of July. So that is when formally and officially the MiCA transition period ends, right? So there has been a gradual approach on the whole MiCA implementation. Those 30 countries that I mentioned to you earlier, they had to announce once MiCA came into effect, what is their transition period going to be? Some countries, they opted for 6 months, some for 12, and the maximum possible transition period was 18 months.
So every jurisdiction could be different.
They could choose between 6 months, 12 months, or 18 months in which they would transition into MiCA. Now, some of the bigger economies, they chose the full length of the 18 months. So that 18 months is now the hard deadline. You cannot go beyond it. But some countries, they already transitioned into MiCA fully, and they have already acted, or they already started enforcement on uncompliant or unregulated exchanges. So it's just now that this July 1st deadline is like no more, right? The ESMA, the pan-European regulator, it's called ESMA. They are the ones who give the instructions and who come up with laws and guidelines for the national competent authorities in each of those 30 member states. They told like that's the deadline. What is now going to happen? There are more than a handful of larger crypto exchanges that have the MiCA license. So I think we have a good backbone and a good foundation in Europe right now with fully regulated participants to absorb and to welcome the clients that decide to leave the unregulated platforms, right? So ESMA has instructed already, there is no more transition after that. You have to comply. They recently also shared an open letter to exchanges saying like, we expect you to start before the 1st of July with an orderly wind down plan, right? So inform your users in advance that you will be leaving the market and tell those users or your clients what they have to do with their funds. So that instruction has already been given. I can already tell you, me and my team, we are clients with most of those European exchanges. So far, I have not yet received an email from any of those to come up with an orderly wind down plan.
Right.
We're now 6 days away from the deadline.
Exactly. I'm looking at the calendar.
Yeah, or 5 days away. So I hope indeed, that we're. I don't know if they're still going to act or what kind of action some of those uncompliant exchanges are going to do. But yeah, the time is running out. That letter from ESMA also mentioned a part to consumers, to the residents of Europe, asking them, take your funds off those unregulated exchanges, right? Like, your funds is not safe. It is not in good hands. After that, take your funds out. The other ask was to influencers or finfluencers or affiliates, saying like, don't participate in promoting unregulated exchanges. What you're doing is illegal. You should not promote unregulated and unlicensed financial services. So now this deadline is coming up, right? We have already received from some smaller to medium-sized exchanges emails or asks like, hey, we will be throwing in the towel. We're stopping our business. We will not be able to receive a MiCA license, or we have purposely chosen not to pursue a MiCA license. We're stopping our business now. Please take over our client base and take them over. So those are some of those ones that we are now currently exploring in how to handle that, how to make sure that those clients are moved onto a safe exchange, that they continue to access their funds through then an OKX platform. So those are things that are happening right now. We clearly see that some of the smaller players, they're throwing in the towel. They said like, we're not going to participate in MiCA. Take our client base, take our users over, right? From some of the bigger names, right. We haven't heard anything yet. So yeah, we're still cautious to see what is going to happen, if anything is going to happen there, and also what are the tools that the European regulators will have to do an active enforcement.
Right.
Because one
what's
of
the hammer,
main,
right?
What's the hammer, right?
Yeah.
Because the thing is, some of the main roles of the financial regulator is to safeguard and to protect the integrity of the market. That's one. The other thing is consumer protection.
Right.
The nuclear bomb would and could be to block the app from the App Store, to block the URLs so that users cannot access those unregulated exchanges anymore. But that is the nuclear weapon, right? Because once they do that, users probably will have difficulties to update their app or to withdraw funds, right? So that is probably like the tool of the last resort. The thing is, recently in Europe, what we have seen as well is recently, I think it was 2-3 weeks ago, Knaken, which is not to mistaken with Kraken, but Knaken was a small to mid-sized local exchange in the Netherlands, suddenly went black, right? Couldn't access them anymore. Many thousands or tens of thousands of customers locked out of their funds. 2-3 months ago, we had a similar situation in Europe with a Polish exchange, the number one Polish exchange called Zonda Crypto, where also suddenly one day to the next, it went black. They couldn't withdraw any funds anymore. The owner disappeared, still at large, nowhere to be found. So the thing that those two exchanges had in common was they didn't have a license. They were not registered. So it is, regardless of the regulators using the nuclear weapon, I think it's just a wise choice, if you care about your assets, to be kept safe, move them into a fully regulated exchange, because it just will only take like a few, X amounts of people to start a bank run on the exchange. When suddenly withdrawals might get compromised, you don't want to be the ones who are left behind. So in that sense, I just want to urge all the users and the consumers in Europe from unregulated exchanges, move your assets off the unregulated exchanges, because eventually they will need to cease operations in Europe.
Right. But I mean, obviously, as a regulated exchange, that's going to benefit OKX, right? Because you've gone through the process, you have essentially built a regulatory moat that allows you to grow even faster. Because what I'm hearing is a lot of the smaller exchanges either don't have the ability or don't have the desire to get the license, and thereby they're primed for either acquisitions or just take over.
I think we need to come to a situation where we have a level playing field, right?
Right.
Regulation is and would have been inevitable because this is a financial product. It's an asset class. Users, consumers, they deserve protection. They deserve clarity. They deserve to know who is the owner of that exchange where I have my funds. Is that person trustworthy? Trust is something that is directly connected when it comes to financial services, right? You want to make sure that the person, the company where you hold your assets, your savings, that it's a trustworthy environment. Moreover, even not only for retail, but also for institutional, if we want as an industry for institutional capital and institutional users to participate in this industry and to make it a global, meaningful environment and space, institutional clients, they demand regulation, they demand regulatory clarity. Which bank, which pension fund, which fund is going to put money in an asset class that is unregulated or in an exchange that is unregulated? That's unheard of. So we had to come to a stage where there was regulatory clarity. We are there now. So we are being held, of course, to high standards to make sure that we prevent money laundering, that we prevent terrorist financing, that we ensure consumer protection, that we also make sure that we have the right technological capabilities to combat fraud, to combat scams, right? So in that sense, you're much more protected as a consumer with a fully regulated exchange. Those exchanges that do not wish or cannot comply with those regulatory standards in keeping your assets safe, into making sure that there is a level playing field, well, the regulator needs to go and do some enforcement on those, right? Because that's the minimum requirement for financial licensed companies, I believe.
That messaging is so consistent. I talked to the CEO of Binance, the CEO of Bybit. I've talked to folks from Kraken as well, and in this podcast, and everyone shares the same thing, right? In fact, the more regulatory clarity around the world, not only in a single jurisdiction, the more you now have, to your point, a level playing field. That's one, but also more accessibility for the users to get access to regulated product. And I think that's probably good for all of us, right? Whether you're investors, you're builders and developers, or you're an operator. So Errol, maybe before we wrap up, I have one question for you. Now, this is a little bit of a curveball, right? So if I am a developer, I want to be in the crypto space, digital asset space, how would you convince me to expand or build my business in Europe versus going to the US? Because it looks like the US, I mean, it's the land of golden opportunity yet again, right? In this whole space. Now, of course, it might have a time period to it, depending on some of the kind of policy directions. But what out of Europe should developers be looking at that is attractive safe, and also more importantly, have that economic growth engine to really drive a business to be successful?
That's a tough one. I think there are pros and cons, and let me elaborate a little bit more on that. With Europe, you have a lot of stability, in my opinion, and also the size, right? Let me compare Europe with US. US, I think GDP, I know the GDP of the US is far superior than that of Europe. Europe, in terms of, or the EEA at least, in terms of population, it's 450 or 480 million people, whereas
more than the US.
It's more than the US, even though the GDP is smaller. The US, it might be a good thing and a bad thing, but every 4 years there is a presidential election, and it might be very pro-crypto, it might be very against crypto, right?
We never know.
We've seen some things play out, so you never know which sense or which direction the new administration will have or is going to have. Where in Europe, it's much more of a stable, not too many dramatic changes that will be happening when it comes to crypto regulation. MiCA is there now. It's going to be here for a very, very long time. And also ESMA, the Pan-European regulator, recently launched their feedback channel. They reached out to consumers, they reached out to the European citizens, they reached out to industry participants for feedback. So they're open to feedback and criticism and improvements. They are now working on what they call MiCA 2.0 to improve and to optimize based on the feedback of the industry, to improve based on the feedback of consumers on how they regulated crypto. Have they gone above and beyond? Have they gone not strict enough? What are the good things? What are the learnings? They've also been looking in how the Middle East, how VARA and how the US is regulating crypto. So they're looking at everything now in order to make the crypto regulatory framework in Europe much more accessible for innovation. They don't want to be left behind on the whole innovation train that is happening with crypto, with blockchain, with AI. So right now, our European leaders are really very much focused on making Europe much more attractive for crypto innovation and crypto investment. So in that sense, I think Europe is quite strong. The other thing is on taxation. Europe is definitely one of the harder jurisdictions when it comes to taxation. I think in that sense, UAE is probably unbeatable. So there's a little bit more of a mixture on that side. There are some jurisdictions in Europe where taxation is still relatively friendly. There are some jurisdictions in Europe where taxation is, very, very hard. So even in Europe, there are some jurisdictions, some countries where you can find some more pro or more crypto-friendly taxation regions. So in that sense, I think it's a little bit more all over. When it comes to talent, I think talent is available everywhere, and this is also something that is very important for your question. Right. Where do you find the right talent? I think also there it's very competitive between US, Europe, and also the Middle East and Asia. So I think talent is available everywhere. No.
That's a much more robust answer than I was expecting. Thank you for that. That's amazing. So, what I hear, I hear about taxation, I hear about talent, and that those are very, very important aspects to consider. But surprisingly, the word that really gravitated to me, and hopefully the audience as well, is the word stability. And I think before, maybe 6 months ago or a year ago, that word would have been seen as boring. But given the world that we're in today, stability is very, very important. Not only from a regulatory perspective, but just from a continuity perspective, business continuity perspective, it is so critical. So, Errol, thank you so much for coming on the show. I think I've had, over the last 20 plus episodes, I've had a number of guests come on, share about the US regulation, Clarity, Genius Act. I've had, guests coming in from Asia, right, sharing about Japan and Singapore and Hong Kong. Europe has been one very large region that we haven't really dived deep into. And this episode did it exactly that. So thank you so much. I hope the audience really learned a lot from your insights and your sharing. And I am sure there's going to be a lot of interesting projects, in the near futures, especially as MiCA 2.0 starts to develop and new opportunity emerge. So thank you again for coming on the show.
Thank you very much for having me, Sean. It was a real pleasure.